everyone, welcome back to another weekly review. We are already on to week 19, and we just finished up our lessons on the executive branch. So we, in the future, are going to be moving on from the executive branch and onto the judicial branch. So this was kind of our last unit on it. You guys got a lot of really great information from Mr. V this week on the presidents. Obviously, you already watched his video, so I'm not going to go back into all of the presidents that he covered. However, I just wanted to discuss on why, how that kind of tied together all the lessons that we have covered this year. So or at least on the executive branch. So with the executive branch, we talked a lot about the powers and the roles of the president. And then throughout Mr. V's presentation, you all got to see how each president was individually able to use some of those roles and powers to make an influential presidency. So we looked at some precedents set by the presidents. So that would be actions that they took during their presidency that kind of set the standard for what future presidents were going to do. You looked at the social impact of the presidents, kind of what was going on during their time as president and how the president reacted to situations. You also looked at how the president was able to act as commander-in-chief under certain presidents and how they would interact with war and what kind of role they took on during that time. Impeachment was mentioned. I know that's something we hear about in the news a lot nowadays, but it's also something that has happened for previous presidents as well. And that's where we got to see some of the legislative power come in and kind of set a check to the presidential power. We also looked at term limitations, different acts that the president would have been involved in. We also got to see how presidents influenced and shaped presidential parties throughout times. And then lastly, we also got to see some executive orders that presidents took. So throughout all of this, you really got to just, learn a little bit more about each president, which was really interesting. But you got to see how those presidents were able to utilize their roles and their powers to really bring about their agendas and set a monumental presidency. Our second assignment for the past week was we got to watch an interview with former President Bush. And then this was a little bit more personal when it came to the presidency. So you got to learn a little bit about each of the presidents, what they did, but then you got to hear from a president firsthand about what they thought about during their presidency. And I feel like that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of things you don't think about when, not being president that the president does have to think about. So you'd get to listen to his own words and his own accounts and just really what he was thinking of during all of these monumental times. President Bush had a lot of major events happen during his presidency, such as 9/11. So you got to see him act as commander-in-chief in response to that. He had a major national disaster with Hurricane Katrina, and along with that, there came a lot of social impact from that and how he was able to handle that and kind of, what he thought his approach should be to unify the country after such horrendous events. And then ending his presidency was the start of the recession. So again, another time that, the people of the United States were greatly affected, and as the leader of the country, something has to be done. So listening to his own personal statements and feelings towards us is very interesting. And yeah, I thought it was a really great assignment. So make sure that you have completed that and watched the video in full and answered all the questions that went along with that. Lastly, I wanted to cover the other assignments that you are doing along with this month. This month is Black History Month, and it's every year. It's the month of February, and I kind of wanted to cover why we're going to be doing assignments with that every week. So it kind of began back in 1915. Some historians at Harvard realized that there was a lot of gaps in American history. We were not necessarily covering the history of people of color and African Americans in our country. So they kind of came together and they decided to dedicate a week to research and promotion of Black achievements in our country. And they really thought that was important, obviously, to our education. It was something that we were lacking in, and then it's really grown from there. So they selected the month of February to celebrate this week of, because February is Frederick Douglass's birthday and Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And just as a reminder, Abraham Lincoln was the president during the Civil War, which eventually set the end to slavery, and Frederick Douglass was a escaped slave. He worked as an abolitionist, and he really became a big leader in the abolitionist movement, and did a lot of work to help free the slaves. So that's a really important month with both of those leaders. And then we've been celebrating Black History Month since 1976. It changed from a week to a whole month when President Ford recognized Black History Month. And since then, every president has celebrated and recognized Black History Month. So we're going to be looking at a couple different things throughout the month, but I wanted to cover last week's. So last week's you guys looked at the amendments, and kind of you got to discuss on what amendment you think did the most for the African American and Black community. So just as a reminder, the 13th Amendment, this is what outlawed slavery in the United States. And then we had the 14th Amendment, and this stated that all people born or naturalized in the United States were citizens. And since they're citizens, no state can pass any law that would discriminate against them, and they must be offered equal protection under the law. And then the 15th Amendment was making sure that all freed slaves got the right to vote. And so it stated that you cannot deny a citizen's right to vote based on a person's race. And then the 19th Amendment, while it is stated to give women the right to vote, it is important to remember that there are many women of color who did not receive the right to vote in the 15th Amendment. You know, any woman of color would not have received that. So it was not until the 19th Amendment that those women would have gained the right to vote as well. And then lastly was the 24th Amendment, and that is what outlawed poll taxes. And poll taxes was a fee that someone had to pay in order to vote in the national election. And obviously that is very discriminatory against people of lower socioeconomic classes. And it was a way to discriminate against a large portion of the African American and Black community. So it was really important to look at those amendments. We're going to continue with assignments like these for the rest of the month, but I just kind of wanted to introduce why we would be looking at that and why it is such an important part of our history and really should be something that we should be emphasizing and learning a lot about in class. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out. We'll be more than happy to help you out. And as usual, please fill out your weekly review chart. The more information you put down, the better. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week.